Whoops. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here at the Charter for Compassion's event, the first of a series honoring the work of Martin Luther King Jr. This is Through the Lens of MLK, Wisdoms and Justice Through Art, a conversation with Tim Holmes. And we are so happy you can be here. For those of you who do not know, the Charter for Compassion is a network of networks working to spread compassion throughout the world in local cities and communities. And we are in over 450 cities and communities across the globe. And you can learn more about us at charterforcompassion.org. And today's guest, as I mentioned, is Tim Holmes. And Tim is a figurative sculptor for whom the human form is not simply bounded by the skin. His abiding interest in sculpting is whatever medium engages him, whether that be a chunk of metal, an idea, or a community. I love that. Though Holmes is most well known for sculpture, he has worked in a variety of other media, from museum installation to film, to foster a rich and imaginative future. He's the first American artist ever invited to exhibit solo at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia, the world's largest art museum, where his sculptures remain on permanent exhibit. His work has gained notice among some of the world's peacemakers, from the Chinese dissident students of Tiananmen Square to the physicians for social responsibility. President Jimmy Carter, the late Coretta Scott King, and Czech President Václav Havel are among Holmes' best-known collectors. As his attention has steadily drifted from making objects towards creating stories of transformation, he's become keenly interested in fostering creative approaches to contemporary problems, particularly among growing social challenges of living together in a rapidly shrinking world. Holmes advocates for preserving rich and vulnerable human qualities amidst the tsunami of expanding technology we all experience, hoping to move the evolution of humanity toward a more responsive and sustainable world. In short, he believes that art is the medicine that will heal the world. And I might add on that, uh, art woven in with compassion. So hello, everybody. I'm Lisa Berkley. I'm the lead of the Peace Sector for the Charter for Compassion. And I am very honored to be here with Tim. Oops. So Tim,
Thank you. It's great
welcome.
to.
Thank you. So let's see, hold on one moment. Let's see, yes. All right. So I want to begin this conversation actually with a quote here. I don't know if you're able to see it on the screen. Looks like
Not yet.
not yet. Okay, we're having a little bit of issues with sharing again. Okay, there we go. Let's see if we can get this done.
Here.
There we go. So this quote: "The contemporary tendency in our society is to base our distribution on scarcity, which has vanished, and to compress our abundance into the overfed mouths of the middle and upper classes until they gag with superfluity. If democracy is to have breadth of meaning, it is necessary to adjust this inequity. It is not only moral, but is also intelligent. We are wasting and degrading human life by clinging to archaic thinking." This was part of Martin Luther King's speech, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, in 1967. So I thought that as I've looked through your work and its impact on social justice and its expression of some of these type of thoughts, that it would be, that was a good jumping off place. So I'll let you take it from there.
Well, I love that quote. It's I think he was probably talking about material scarcity, but it occurs to me, particularly after this last period in our nation's history, which has been so traumatic, that that scarcity also applies to goodwill. You know, we are our nation is kind of seized with this fever that we believe that goodwill is in such great scarcity that we have to hoard it, and it's only our own, you know, little tiny tribe that has access to goodwill. And I just think that's a beautiful quote to apply to our current situation um, because we all are vibrant, alive human beings that have these tendencies to reach out to each other. You know, that's one of our basic drives is just to be in contact with each other. And and it's become increasingly hard politically to do that to people who are different from us. And so the truth of that statement just rings true through the decades. It's just as true as it was then, even though in my mind we've had a great deal of human unfolding since MLK's time. Uh, just within my own lifetime, we've seen the civil rights movement and the women's movement
Mhm.
and the movements like the for gay and lesbian rights and even animal rights, and all of these things have come from being almost uh, vanishingly absent when I was born to a time now where all of these are exactly in the front of political awareness and social awareness as we move around the world.
I thoroughly agree with that, and especially as we've seen the Black Lives Matter, and the reminders of the lessons of MLK. And so I hear you, in conversations that we've had previously, and when I've looked at some of your artwork, I've seen those themes obviously in your work, and I'm curious how it goes from your mind and heart and out your hands into creation. Can you share more about your creative process?
Well, sure, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. My brother is the sixth generation of United Methodist ministers in our family on both ends of the tree. So I come from this long line of particularly Methodist ministers. But back 400 years ago, one of my relatives was the first Baptist minister in this country, and there's this tradition that I think I've inherited of being kind of a loud, irritating voice. And my father was involved in some of the marches in D.C. during the 60s and 70s. My mother was one of the early women legislators in Montana.
Wow.
And in fact, she she did a whole bunch of work, but one thing that I think she is unique in is I believe she's the first legislator in the country to protect non-smokers, to come up with a
Wow.
bill to protect non-smokers. And so, you know, my brother and sister and I grew up in a family that was always motivated to take care of the less fortunate around us, and compassion was kind of the middle name of the family.
Mhm.
So I grew up in that kind of environment, and fortunately, I had a very loving family and good relationships with all of them. And my parents encouraged me. I find it hard to believe that at 10 years old, I fell in love with metal sculpting,
Wow.
and they allowed me to buy a set of welding tanks and set them up in the garage.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I had to, go out and get a paper route and raise all the money to
Yeah,
buy
right.
them.
Right.
But I just can't believe that they'd let a 10-year-old kid fire up the welding torch in the garage. And so I started making sculpture mostly as a kid making toys. I was just having fun. And it wasn't until about 10 years later that uh, my kind of religious nature started coming out in my work. I started doing sculptures about hunger and um, animals and Native American spirituality and that kind of thing.
Wow, that's so interesting that you tie your religious aspect or your spiritual aspect through that. Like, I don't know if I would have called that religious, and yet your how you connect religiosity is through what I might deem as social justice, and yet through the lens of what is really required of God, or through God or spirit or whatever form that unifying or maybe deunifying uh, energy costs. That for you they're so interconnected. Um, wow, interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, and in many ways, my brother and sister both have this same kind of attitude. My brother moved into the ministry, and so he's doing what would seem sort of um, what would be expected for the son of a minister. And uh, my sister is a brilliant writer, but she runs a performing arts center, and and so brings art into the community in new and very surprising ways. And so all three of us are doing a kind of ministry in different ways. And for me, art, it has this kind of magic that it can reach the part of a person that cannot be reached by dialogue or by discourse. Um, and I never I never cease to be amazed at how powerful art is and how it can change people on a visceral level, including myself. I'm always surprised by the things that move me.
Well, yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think that one of the things with art that's so spectacular is it transcends the brain, it transcends intellect, and in some ways it can transcend culture. When you see a human's face in pain or a body expressing pain, that kind of cuts through things that get caught in socially acceptable language. Um, so I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead. Were you going to say something more?
Well, um, yeah, it's cross cultural. It's very like the experience of falling in love for me.
Hmm.
I mean, sometimes, you see a puppy in the airport and something happens to your heart and you just, you're captivated,
Yeah.
regardless of being late for your plane and having too much to carry and all this stuff. In much the same way, art can come out and grab you in a way that is just absolutely stunning.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I've become more and more aware of that. When I was younger, um, I did I did fairly traditional art forms. I started out with welded steel sculpture and moved in the early 80s into bronze sculpture, mostly because I was I was becoming successful enough that I couldn't keep up. And I had a manager at the time, and he convinced me that if we make bronze sculpture, he can sell much more than I could,
Well, right.
you
Do
know.
you want to share any of your work with us?
Yeah, do you want me to do that or
Well, why don't maybe you have a story, but actually, before we go there, and we have somebody who's with us online here, who actually has been a collector of yours, and so I'm gonna invite her to sort of share, if you're comfortable with that, like how has it been living with your work? Ethel, are you open to doing that? Hold on, you're muted. Can you unmute?
Yes, I don't know if you could call me a collector. I have two pieces, and when Tim said sometimes a piece of art just grabs you,
Mhm.
this is what I think. I think maybe it was not until 82 or 83, maybe actually, that I got the first. In fact, it's here on my screen. That song from Another Voice. She's not quite positioned the way she should be, though. I always have her coming out into the room, and I actually have a housekeeper, and she always puts it back wrong. So I'm wanting to. But anyway, I was in Helena for a teachers' meeting with two other friends It was foreign language teacher, so that's why I think it was a little later than what I thought. And one of them knew Bob Fitzgerald, who was representing Tim, and another, because of that, she was already acquainted with Tim's work, and so she was interested in going over. And it wasn't at Tim's studio, or maybe it was, but it wasn't with Tim. And Bob showed us some of the work. And I'm a runner, and I was sitting there while they were talking, and I just kept looking at Song of Another Voice. And to me, she is a runner leaping out of her body with joy and, vitality. And so I was pretty newly divorced, and I didn't really have any money. And it was $500. And I went ahead and bought it. Left a note for my son, who was junior high age, that I know you'd rather have a sofa than this art, but I just had to buy it. And he told me, he said, I knew why you bought it the minute I saw it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so then it was many years later that I visited Tim's studio and saw the blast. And it just struck me. And I just, just looked at it, and I didn't try to buy it. And Tim told me I had to do this. It's his statement about nuclear war. And he said, I don't know why anybody would want it. And I wasn't really wanting to buy it, but I wanted to be with it, And a few years later, they had a project and needed money. And Bob called me and said, are you still interested in the blast? And I said, yes. So I bought it, and I keep it in my computer room by my computer because it's not something that most people would appreciate. Yeah.
There's the sculpture.
Wow.
And it's disturbing, yes. But for me, it's that reminder to keep working for peace.
Which was such one of the most important messages of MLK, the work for peace and equity and justice, and keep going and keep going and keep going.
Yeah.
I was one of his quotes. I'm trying to remember it. Yeah, it says it's from a speech that he gave before a group of students at Barrett Junior High School in Philadelphia on October 26, 1967. And he said, be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be a sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or fail. Be the best of whatever you are. And I really appreciate that in this context, because it's just do something, work better, find your voice, whatever voice that is, and let it go and let it out in the world. And Tim, with these two sculptures, there for me, I go back almost through some of the messages of MLK, because you hear this freedom, this running towards freedom and breaking out of old beings, old ways of being. And then the sculpture of the blast, how do we overcome through such trauma? And it goes back also to how we started this conversation. Where are we today? um, and how your art, and actually all art, can reflect our times. Um, so thank you, Ethel, for sharing your input.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, and I might add, talking about bringing it up to date, and well, not up to date, but when 9/11 happened, I'm a Unitarian, and we just had a circle that day, that Sunday. We're a small group. And I took both of my sculptures because they represented to me the two sides of the joy and then the tragedy of weapons. And that was just, to me, an example of what Tim's work can do. Shows, you know, it grabs you.
Oh, thank you. I'll I'll share this. Oops. Let's see.
So Tim, while you're sharing, oh, okay, oh, beautiful.
This is called Song Another Voice. This is the sculpture that
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 Ethel
Ethel was
has.
talking about. And actually, it was picked up by a group called Peace Links, which is a group of women in the US that wanted to make relationships with women in Russia during the Cold War, because they figured one way to uh, to keep the world from falling into nuclear war is to develop personal relationships between women across that line. And so they awarded this to women who were working for peace around the world, like Rosalind Carter was one who was awarded this. And it's to me, it is, as Ethel said, it's breaking out of old forms to try to develop a a new attitude toward the future that allows for human flourishing regardless of the constraints that have been put on us through traditional means. So I think it's brilliant that Ethel took these two sculptures. The blast is just the most horrible depiction of a human being in the worst of violent um, conflict, and the Song of Another Voice is almost the other end of the spectrum. It's just this absolute bursting joy. So in many ways, it sort of puts parentheses around the human experience.
Hmm. So I know that you're my experience of you in our pre-conversation and even now is incredible humility and not wanting to be what's the word, braggadocious, not wanting to be to promote yourself too much, which is why I understand you had a manager at one point.
Yeah,
um, um, but I'm going to ask you to sort of step out of the comfort zone a little bit, and because your work has been shared across the globe and really recognized for the role it's played in peace and justice, social justice. Are you comfortable telling us more about what some of the feedback has been?
yeah. Um, I've just been so lucky in that regard that I don't know where to start. But like for instance, in the middle '80s, there was a branch of the United Methodist Church, the national international branch, called I think it was called the Church and Society Committee, and they wanted to present one of my sculptures to Archbishop Tutu of South Africa, who is working on trying to turn this horribly um, fascist government into a representative democracy. And let me see if I can pull up a picture here of a sculpture that they purchased to present to him.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and it just so happens that the presentation was going to be made at a conference where I'm also in a group called the Montana Logging and Ballet Company, a political satire group, and we were going to be giving a concert in Kentucky at this conference where the sculpture was going to be presented. And so they asked me if I wanted to present it to him, and I was just absolutely floored. I said, "Of course, he's one of the most, revered human beings on the planet." And I was so moved that they chose this sculpture. It's called "I Shot an Angel by Mistake."
Wow, you
And
give me goosebumps. Wow, sorry,
it
go ahead.
very much talks about um, our situation, and specifically, it was created about the situation in Central America. I felt like we were during the Reagan years. We were, mining the harbors in Nicaragua and just being so belligerent to this little tiny poor country. And at some point, I thought, like this sculpture, we are going to be seized with a sense of remorse when we realize that our actions have resulted in the death of something sacred. And so I got to present this to Tutu. And I'll see if I can find a picture of this. Um, and once my group heard about the
So we're still, just for point of reference, we're still seeing the sculpture. Is that what you want us to see?
yeah.
Okay, great. It's amazing.
So when the Montana Logging and Ballet Company heard that I was going to be giving this sculpture, they said, "Well, we want to be involved." So we wrote a song about the situation in South Africa, and it's called "Take the Barriers Down." And we sang the song, presented the sculpture to him, and he was so moved by the event that he invited us to go to South Africa, and of course we couldn't at the time because of the cultural boycott that was in place because of apartheid in South Africa. And so we invited him to the U.S. to do fundraisers for him, and we did one on the East Coast, and then later on we invited him to come to Montana, of all places, and he came here, and we did a fundraiser with him, and we raised almost $1 million in money and in scholarships to both get Black South Africans to the U.S. to study, and also to get Native Americans to South Africa to make this kind of cultural exchange. And so I was able to do some collaborative projects with him that that were really really transformative for me. It was 4 years after our concert in Montana that Mandela succeeded in bringing South Africa into, the community of modern nations and giving South Africa their first free and fair election in 500 years. And so my manager and I went down to South Africa to, this brand new country. We were able to walk around in the Senate while they're figuring out how they're going to construct this new country. It was just astonishing. It was like being with the founding fathers.
Wow, that's incredible.
And we were staying with Tutu's secretary, so we got to hear all these great stories. One of them has to do with a sculpture that he got because of a different project. Again, I'm going to sort of stagger around here while I find this photo, but here's an image of the sculpture that he kept in his private chapel in South Africa. And his secretary tells me that he would go into his chapel when he did his private prayers in the morning and light a candle before this sculpture.
Is this your work?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
It's called The Rumble of Release. And it was created actually I started working on this on Martin Luther King Day in about 1970, 1987 or so. And it's kind of hard to see, but it depicts this black man on his knees, and his knees, I don't know if you can see my cursor,
Yeah, we can see your cursor. Is there any way to zoom in on it to make it? I mean, we see it pretty clearly. Okay. Oh, okay. Can you,
So
and
the legs here turn into arms and body parts, and then at the very end it turns into chains. And so this this poor guy is uh, trying to release himself from this whole history of oppression. Um, and as you can see, he is not defeated by it. It becomes kind of an inspiration, and oftentimes I'll look at an image like this and just feel in my own body how the human spirit is always trying to do this, to break out of the boundaries and to be free uh, to live in relationship to the greater world.
mm.
This is inbuilt in all of us. And one of the things that, well, go ahead.
No, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about the struggle and what we work through as humans, and again, how much compassion that we need to have for one another as we go through these kinds of struggles. But I'm sorry, I am just in awe of your story. So please continue.
Well, it occurs to me that um, that we're we're in this very pivotal moment in human history.
Hmm.
I know that everybody feels like their moment is the most important, but I'm thinking about a quote by Carl Jung, who's um, uh, a real inspiration for me. The founding psychologist. Carl Jung said uh, in a footnote in a book that's kind of obscure, says millions of years and untold millions of ancestors has worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this eternal moment.
Hmm.
You take each moment as the eternal moment, as if nothing were ever going to change, not anticipating a faraway future, for the future always grows out of that which is. You must live in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of possibilities. And I think of the fact that all of us stand on the shoulders of our parents, and um, our parents stand on the shoulders of their parents. And so there's this pyramid of all of our ancestors that stretch millions of years back into the roots of life on this earth. And we, those of us who are alive now, stand at the pinnacle of that pyramid. And it's up to us to, you know, to burst out into new creativity. And all of the people who are dead behind us have been supporting us in this moment. And each one of us is standing at the very edge of an expanding universe. And it's our responsibility to open up the possibilities and step into a future that has not been created. So I feel like we are each co-creating the universe with God.
Mm-hmm.
That God gives us this incredible stage on which we human beings are given consciousness and a heart full of love. And it's up to us to do the dance.
Mm-hmm.
And the dance is how we reach other people. So every one of these projects that I've been involved in always has to do with reaching across a boundary to another person who has been forgotten by the powers that be, whether it's the blacks in South Africa during the apartheid years, or another project I was involved in, the Chinese dissident student movement, the movement for freedom that was horribly curtailed during the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. And I had been doing a series of these peace awards, like the Song of Another Voice and one for the UN and that kind of thing. And so I kind of got this reputation of creating awards for peaceful organizations. And so about a week after the Tiananmen Square massacre, I got a phone call. They wanted, they had heard that I did this kind of thing, and some of the people that escaped from Tiananmen Square came to the U.S. and were able to put together this organization to try to get back into China the story of what had happened, because of course the Chinese government was um, was denying that this ever happened. Can you see this?
Wow, those is incredible. Yes, we see it.
So what they did, um, in conjunction with my manager, who helped develop sales for these, we sold these sculptures, and the money raised was used to get the truth back into China about what had happened. And this is a remarkable story, because what unfolded was what's called the first fax revolution in history. So these students took a narrative of what had happened in Tiananmen Square, photographs and eyewitness accounts. They typed it all up into a big long sheet, and they just faxed it to random numbers all over China. And so people would come into their offices on Monday morning, and out of the fax machine is coming this incredible story of something that happened in their own country that they didn't know about. And unfortunately, the Chinese government has been very successful in erasing this event from history. So Chinese people know nothing about this anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just astonishing. And today, in fact, in China, you can be prosecuted for making reference to the events in Tiananmen Square. And that beautiful photograph of the tank man, the man standing in front of this line of tanks, stopping the line, is also verboten in China. And so some of the dissidents there have adopted the rubber ducky as a symbol of that tank. And so they publish pictures of a rubber ducky, and the Chinese government can't do anything about it because what's wrong with the rubber ducky?
Wow.
So
Incredible.
it
Tell
just,
us.
it
Sorry, go ahead.
points out how the human creative spirit can always figure out a way to undermine dictatorial thinking and close, violent, powerful thinking like that. Power-based thinking, I should say.
Mm.
So
Wow.
in this sculpture, you can see this figure on the left is the Chinese characters for peace. And down here at the bottom, you can see the two Chinese characters put together
Mm.
that read peace.
Yeah. Wow. You know, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Turn the sculpture to the side and you see this leaping figure that to me represents the nonviolent character of that movement.
Mm. Mm.
Go ahead.
I love the bass. Well, you know, as you're talking and thinking about this story with the rubber ducky and creativity, you know, I'm reminded of MLK's as part of one of the things he said in his Peace Prize acceptance speech in 1964 with his in Oslo, Norway, when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, was he said, "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant." And it reminds me really of what you're speaking about, because in the end, creativity and life will continue to win, and the hope and prayer, you know, is that truth will win out even in China, and eventually the story of Tiananmen Square will be brought to more public consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about truth is you cannot bury it forever.
Right.
And we are all tempted to use power to gain an advantage immediately. And usually that works. But what's always the case is it never works in the long run.
Right.
It's always love and compassion that is stronger than anything else in the long run. And so those of us in this community need to hang on to this idea that sure enough,
It's
sure
true.
enough,
It's true. You're also, I want to circle back because when we put out a call, when we, in our peace newsletter, or peace communication through the Charter for Compassion, we asked anybody who wanted to highlight their work and share with their work, gave them the opportunity to reach out. And you were one of the people who responded. And I don't know if you have photographs of it, but there was some incredible work that you had done about where you feel we are today. And so I know that we're getting close to, we've got about 15 minutes left or so of this conversation, which I feel like we can, I feel like we could listen to your stories for hours, but do you have any photographs of, and it may be a work in progress too, so I don't know if you're willing to share that, but this, I think it was, you talked about a sculpture you did, like the state of humanity.
oh yeah.
I think.
Um, this is a sculpture that I made during the uh, the pandemic and the sequestration that is the most complex sculpture I've ever done in my life. It's
Hey, Ethel, wait till you see this. If you're still, yeah, you are still here.
oops, it's not working.
Oh, wait, Ethel, sorry, you're muted.
There we go. Can you see this?
Yes.
So this is a kind of a column of about 20, 24 figures. It's about 4 feet high, and it's kind of inspired by The Gates of Hell by Rodin in the 19th century. This is it feels to me like the story of humanity, and there is a video tour of it online. Maybe we can put a link into that. It's the sculpture is called Awaken Human,
Mm.
and uh, it on the bottom are these figures that are sort of stunned by the events of the world. And as you crawl up the sculpture, they become more engaging with each other and they're helping each other up. And eventually, here's this figure that is kind of striding off into the future. Um, it,
What an incredible piece. I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's hard to see, in 2 dimensions and just one view. But I encourage you to look at the video where you get a little better understanding of what the whole thing is about. But to me, this is responding to this feeling that, especially during 2020, the mud of humanity has been stirred up. Everything has been questioned and thrown up in the air. And all of us want to go back to the way things were. And I really want us not to sink into that temptation. As long as the mud is stirred up, we can make changes and we can change the way we deal with the environment. We can change the way we respond to strangers, immigrants, that kind of thing. We can change everything we do when the mud is stirred up. And after it settles again, it's going to be really hard to make changes in the way the human mechanism operates in this world. And I really feel that the trajectory that humanity has built is absolutely suicidal. We are setting ourselves up to become extinct, and not by accident, but by design, because what we're doing is we've fallen in love with this idea of progress, that as long as we expand the economy and that we make more money and that we create more tools, everything will always get better. And I really feel like we've kind of hit the top of the trajectory. And from this point on, when we get a new tool, like a, this beautiful machine that gives us access to the whole world, um, I hope that we're able to say every time we get something like this, is there a cost to my humanity for embracing this new technology? Because what I'm afraid we're going to do is lose the primacy of humanity to the strength of the machine. So in many ways, we are in a contest between the human and the machine. And the human being is very inefficient. We like to have good food. We like to spend a lot of time in relationship, which doesn't produce anything. It doesn't. It doesn't.
It doesn't produce anything concrete, but actually, what we do know is that spending time together produces love, produces care, produces compassion, produces so many things that actually help us thrive as beings, as well as the species around us and nature, so
Yes, and I think if
yeah.
every one of us, if we really look at that question, what does the GDP do for your family? Nothing. What does it for your family is making relationships and reaching out to people and wasting time, hugging each other.
Right. Well, it's interesting because this is what we're if you look at what's happening now in light of COVID and in light of the sculpture, that you've just showed us. We're seeing while we're seeing the increased numbers of violence arising and domestic violence, animal abuse. At the same time, we're also seeing, like the Charter for Compassion, we're more than ever. We are, as an organization, getting emails and people signing up for things to get engaged, looking for solutions. So I think your comment about the mud is really very relevant. And what are we gonna sculpt with it? What are we going to mold with it? What's our future? And in your sculpture that you just shared with us too, I really appreciate that the figure's hand was reaching up for what is it, symbolically that's divinity or the unknown or whatever.
I wanted to respond a little. Unfortunately, my computer needed to be plugged in, and it just was not getting the power, and I missed the first part of that wonderful sculpture. So I had a couple of questions. One, did you just do this? This is a recent one. And also, what is the name of it, Tim? It's
called Awaken Human.
Uh-huh.
And I just did finish it about 6 months ago.
Oh my!
It's the most complex sculpture I've ever done, and it's actually too complex to cast into bronze.
Oh my!
So I'm hoping that sometime soon we'll get a very detailed 3D scan technology, and it can actually be printed in some kind of metal like bronze.
So can it be seen at your studio?
Yes, and unfortunately it's too fragile to move. So come to my studio and you can see it.
Well, I may tell my son John to come over. He has one of your China sculptures, and I can't remember the name of it.
China
I
piece.
thought he might even have two. And I did have one other question when we're talking about South Africa. Your sculpture Coming Home
Welcome Home
is also Africa, isn't it? And do you have any comments on it? Because there we are with that outstretched hug.
And while you're getting that, for those who are on this call, if they're in the chat box, you'll see it says Awaken Human Sculpture Tour with the link.
Thank you.
there. And for anybody else who may be watching after the fact, of which I know there'll be many, if you can Google Awaken Human Sculpture Tour and find it on YouTube.
Great.
I'll just put up an image of this. It's called Welcome Home. And it's this big black grandma who is welcoming all the citizens of South Africa.
Sculpture
It's the
called
first
Awaken
time that the South Africans have all been equal citizens. And so
Tim,
this was a monument.
we lost you a little bit on that. So can you kind of go over that again? I'm sorry, that she's a big black woman.
Big black
embracing-
grandma kind of welcoming all the grandchildren. And this is done for South Africa because for the first time in history, all of their citizens get to be equal. And I wanted to concentrate on the hope of the future rather than the torment of the past. So this is a monument that's installed at a peace center outside the prison where Mandela was imprisoned in South Africa.
Wow, incredible. What an incredible story. I mean, you've really embodied the intersection of social justice and the arts and human rights and compassion and spirit. I mean, what a
Well,
life.
thank you.
What
It's
a
a great
life.
life.
Wow. So we have got about 3 minutes left. Is there anything else that it feels like on your heart that you would like to share?
Well, I'm really appreciative of this organization. I am so moved by Karen Anderson's uh, inception of compassion as a medicine for the world, and uh, it we all have to work together. We are like a family in a lifeboat. We all have to share what we have. We have to uphold each other. We have to keep encouraging each other. It's the only way forward. And the alternative is really some sort of massive disaster that we are certainly headed for. And it's going to take all of us to keep from driving humanity over the cliff. And I would hate to lose this beautiful, creative species. We are such an amazing animal. And we might be unique in the entire universe. We just don't know. But certainly, our ability to be compassionate, our ability to make our own lives much bigger than our bodies and clothes is absolutely stunning. And we should all be grateful for that gift.
Mm. Mm, mm. What a important message. So thank you for your time. I guess I want to do a little bit of promoting here of your work. So people can find you on Instagram, and the slide that I had originally done, I had a crash earlier, as I mentioned, with my slides and had to redo them. So can you share screen with people can find you? I know on Instagram and on your website, and what's the best way to learn more about your work?
I'll put my website in the chat. This is it's timholmesstudio.com. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got a Facebook page. If you just Google Tim Holmes Studio, you'll find most of these outlets. I've got Instagram and Twitter and other social media outlets, Facebook.
So you're being humble here. So whoops, I'm gonna show this up on the screen so people can see. Here's your screen, and then all of the various social media platforms at the top. And of course, it's timholmesstudio.com. So what a beautiful photograph. You can see all of his new works, and as you may have seen, there was just a quick pop-up. So you can also join a mailing list to get updates about his work. And I don't know if you're still focusing on the intersection of social justice. I mean, certainly your last work.
Always.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you for being with us. It's truly been an honor, and I look forward to following you in all of your various medias. It's been a gift to get to know you and to learn more about your work, and to share it with the charter community, because it is so in alignment with what our values are, and really in alignment with the world that we're trying to create. Really one of care, compassion, equity, social justice, etc., and love. So thank you. Um, and thank you to everyone who has joined us either live or watching us after the fact. I'm going to just, our next Through the Lens of MLK will be on Tuesday, February 23rd from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Then that's Pacific Standard Time. And that's going to be Crossing the Bridge, Judaism, Compassion, and Positivity. And it will be joined by author and speaker and positivity coach Doris Hornstein. And I have had the honor already of having a conversation with her, and it's a lot of fun. She's got a great sense of humor and really a lot of wisdom. So I hope you can join us. Go to thecharterforcompassion.org to register. And I hope we'll see you then. But in the meantime, I come back to Tim. And thank you, Tim, so much for your time and energy and just goodness to the world. You are a blessing. So
Well, thank you.
thank you.
Been great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. It's wonderful to hear you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ethel.
everyone.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.